All right, people, strap yourselves in, because today we're diving into some filth so deep you'll feel like you need a shower afterward. Forget all those pretty fairy tales about princesses and knights. The reality was a hell of a lot darker, and the bottom line is simple. You were sold off before you even learned how to speak. Oh yes, you heard me. Forget about your first steps. Forget about your favorite teddy bear. In the world we're talking about, your only real value was your womb. And the bluer your blood, the sooner they slapped a price tag on you. You weren't a child. You were your family's winning lottery ticket. Just so you get the sheer scale of this tragedy, let's talk specifics. Margaret Beaufort. The name might not ring a bell, but this woman was the mother of the first Tudor king. She was married off for the first time at the age of 6. 6? What were you doing at 6? Playing in a sandbox. She was handed over as property to a man old enough to be her grandfather. Luckily, that marriage was never finalized, but the reprieve was short-lived. At 12, she was married off again, this time for real. Now imagine it. You're 12 years old. Your body isn't even fully formed. Your bones are brittle, and you're tossed into bed with a grown man twice your age and 3 times your weight. Imagine the horror, the pain, the humiliation. By 13, she was pregnant. The birth was so traumatic it nearly killed her, leaving her physically mangled for the rest of her life. She would never have another child. Her one and only child, delivered in agony when she was just a 13-year-old girl. Think this was a one-off? Not even close. Isabella of Valois, a French princess. She became Queen of England at 6 years old. 6. When she arrived to meet her 29-year-old husband, King Richard II, her dowry, alongside jewels and lavish gowns, included her dolls. A queen with her dolls, can you even imagine? She was playing in a dollhouse with her ladies-in-waiting, while a bunch of old men decided the fate of an entire country for her. And here's the real kicker. This is the part they don't tell you in the history books. In those books, it's all prim and proper. Dynastic marriages, strengthening alliances. But what was it really? It was state-sanctioned child trafficking. A child was simply an economic asset. A girl was a way to cement an alliance between 2 warring clans, to acquire new lands, or simply to patch up a hole in the treasury. Her opinion? Nobody gave a damn. Her fear, her tears, her pain, they were just background noise to the clinking of coins and the rustle of treaties. Your childhood wasn't yours. Your body wasn't yours. Your life was plotted out on parchment with blood and money before you even uttered your first word. So next time you're watching a movie about knights and fair ladies, just remember that behind the pretty picture, there was almost always the stench of fear, sweat, and broken childhoods. The wedding night was a public humiliation. All right, people, strap yourselves in. Today we're diving into a darkness that will make your modern ideas of romance shrivel up and die. Forget rose petals, champagne, and a night for just the 2 of you. Because the wedding night in the good old days wasn't a sacred act of love, but a full-blown public humiliation. Yeah, you heard that right. Picture this. The wedding feast is over, the guests are good and drunk, and the master of ceremonies, or whoever they had, announces, "And now, dear guests, let's escort the newlyweds to their bedchamber." And the entire shouting, soused crowd, from your great-great-aunt to some shady friend of your father's, crams into the bedroom with you. Just so you understand the scale of this tragedy, this isn't a figure of speech. They all literally came into the room. And that's when the real twisted fun began. The bride would be placed in the middle of the room, and her bridesmaids, aunts, sisters, the entire female contingent of the party, would descend on her to get her undressed. And it wasn't tender or erotic. Forget it. It was more like inspecting a mare at the market before a sale. They'd rip her dress off, giggling, groping her, and making crude jokes about how skinny she was, or how she was well padded. And there she stood, the poor girl, naked or in a thin shift, burning with shame under dozens of pairs of eyes. But wait, it gets worse. When the couple was finally tucked into bed and the canopy was drawn, you think everyone left? Yeah, right. The most responsible guests, usually the parents or a couple of respected matrons, stayed in the room, right behind the curtain. And they waited. They waited for the deed to be done. They won't tell you this in the history books, but they would literally stand there, listening to the creak of the bed to make sure the marriage was consummated. And then they'd wait for the proof, that infamous bedsheet that would be proudly displayed for the whole village to see in the morning. Talk about pressure on the guy, huh? His entire manhood is on the line, and his new mother-in-law is on the other side of the curtain, counting every groan. Oh, and the cherry on top of this humiliation sundae. While the couple was in there trying to perform under intense scrutiny, the guests would start a fun little game. They'd take off their stockings and, with their backs to the bed, hurl them over their shoulders. It was believed that if your stocking landed on one of the newlyweds, you'd be the next to marry. Can you just picture it? You're trying to have sex for the first time in your life, and you're being pelted from all sides by someone's sweaty, stinking stockings, all to the sound of a drunken, roaring crowd. So yeah, no privacy, no tenderness, just a public performance, an exam for all to see. And you complain about nosy relatives at your wedding? Trust me, you got off easy. Childbirth was a death sentence. All right, buckle up. Today we're talking about something that gets romanticized by anyone and everyone, the birth of a new life. Tiny little feet, baby coos. Yeah, forget all that crap. Because for a woman in the past, especially in the Middle Ages, pregnancy wasn't a joyous 9-month wait. It was basically a death sentence. Seriously, just wrap your head around the numbers. The chance of dying during or immediately after childbirth was roughly 1 in 3. 1 in 3, with every single pregnancy. That's like playing Russian roulette, but with 2 bullets in the chamber instead of 1, and you had to play every time an heir was needed. Can you imagine that primal terror? For 9 months, you walk around not knowing if you'll leave the birthing room alive or be carried out feet first. And the medicine? That was a whole other horror show. It wasn't help. It was sophisticated torture. Imagine, you're in excruciating pain, the contractions are crippling, you're losing all your strength, and what does the doctor do? He says, you've got some bad humors building up. We should probably let some blood to relieve the pressure. And he does. They'd perform bloodletting with filthy instruments right in the middle of labor, when you're already losing blood by the pint. Genius, right? And those famous birthing chairs? They looked like thrones, but were actually instruments of torture. They were designed to literally squeeze the baby out of you, breaking your pelvic bones and tearing everything to shreds. You're sitting on this grotesque wooden contraption, drenched in sweat, blood, and tears, surrounded by a crowd, midwives, relatives, a priest with the last rites, no hygiene, no painkillers, just pain, humiliation, and the reek of fear. And here's something the history books definitely gloss over. There was a woman named Margaret Beaufort, mother of King Henry VII. She went through her first and last childbirth at 13. Let that sink in. 13. She was still a child herself. Her underdeveloped body simply couldn't handle the hell it was put through. She was literally torn apart from the inside to save the infant heir. She survived, yes. But the injuries left her barren for life, and it wasn't like you could refuse. For a noble woman, this was your primary duty, to produce heirs. Non-stop. One heir, then a spare, then another one in case of plague. You gave birth. You survived? Great. Here's a year off. Now get back to it. On and on, until the next child dragged you into the grave with it. That's the dark side of motherhood. Brutal? Yes. But it was their reality. Your husband had the legal right to kill you. All right, buckle up. Today we're diving into a darkness that makes your worst nightmares look like a fairy tale. We're talking about a time when your darling husband had the full, goddamn legal right to kill you, and nobody would have said a word. Yeah, you heard that right. Forget all that. If he hits you, he loves you. Nonsense. Back then, it was, if he hits you, he's educating you. And it was enshrined in law. Meet the doctrine of reasonable chastisement. Sounds civilized, doesn't it? In reality, it meant your husband could legally beat you with a rod. There was even a gentlemanly little rule. The stick had to be no thicker than his thumb. Can you imagine? Some huge blacksmith with hands like excavator buckets measuring out a club against his thumb before going in to discipline his wife for oversalting the soup. Bruises, broken ribs, knocked out teeth. That was just a part of married life. Reasonable chastisement, my ass. Think that was just for the peasants? Ha, not a chance. To get the full scale of the tragedy, let's look at the kings. Remember Henry VIII? That ginger boar didn't just get divorced. He sent his wives to the chopping block. And you know what they were charged with? Treason. And you know what counted as treason? Anything. Couldn't produce an heir? Treason. Looked at another man? Treason. He just got tired of you? They'd find a reason to call it treason. And just like that, heads would roll to the applause of the crowd. All perfectly legal. They won't tell you this in the history books, but when a woman married, she legally ceased to exist as a person. You were a non-entity. Your dowry? It was his now. The house you inherited from your parents? His. You couldn't even sign a damn contract or file a lawsuit. You were property, a thing. A little smarter than a cow, but with fewer rights. And now for the rotten cherry on top of this disgusting cake. Imagine your marriage wasn't working out, and you wanted it annulled. For example, by proving it was never consummated. Think you just have a quiet chat with a judge? No, darling. You were in for a humiliating public inspection. You, naked, in a cold room, being examined by a commission of serious men in wigs and experienced midwives. They poked, they prodded, they discussed you like a slab of meat at the market, trying to figure out if you were still a virgin. Imagine that clammy shame, the stench of sweat and unwashed bodies all around, their leering, judging eyes while you just stand there, praying for it to be over. And all this for a chance, a sliver of a chance, to escape the hell you were legally thrown into. So yeah, to be a woman was to be a thing to be beaten, humiliated, and if you happened to be a queen, executed in style. And after all that, you're still wondering why they burned witches at the stake? Oh, we'll get to that next time. And it's going to be a scorcher, till death do us part. Wasn't a vow, it was a forecast. All right, folks, ready for another dose of grim history? Today, we're dissecting a phrase that makes most people swoon. Till death do us part. Sweet, right? Bullshit. In the Middle Ages, and even later, that wasn't a pledge of eternal love. It was a goddamn weather forecast, and the outlook was usually shit. Forget golden anniversaries and touching old couples holding hands. The average marriage back in those glory days lasted maybe 15 years, 20 if you really hit the jackpot. And not because people split up like they do now, but because one of them just died. And usually, they died ugly. Women died in droves during childbirth, turning the marital bed into a bloody swamp. The men, any old scratch from a dirty nail or a rusty plow could swell into a pus-filled abscess the size of your fist in a couple of days, and that was it. A week later, you were pushing up daisies. So, your spouse kicks the bucket. Think it's time for mourning, black clothes, and sad social media posts? You had a couple of weeks, maybe a month, to find a new partner. This wasn't Tinder. This was a goddamn survival game. To give you some perspective, a widow with kids and no man was a walking target, facing certain starvation. A widower with a brood of little ones and a farm to run meant guaranteed chaos and famine. So yeah, while your late wife's body was still warm, you were already sizing up the widow next door. Not because you were a heartless bastard, but because otherwise, your kids would fucking starve. And now for the part they definitely don't teach you in history class. They'll show you the dynasties of kings. I'll show you the reality of the common man. Serial monogamy, by death, was the absolute norm. Having 3, 4, even 5 spouses in a lifetime was just another Tuesday. All the previous ones simply died. And the ultimate matchmaker and marriage counselor from hell was, of course, the Black Death. Can you imagine? One day, you had a family, a wife, kids. The next, you were alone because the plague had wiped them all out. One minute you were holding her hand, the next you were dragging her corpse, covered in black, oozing buboes, out into the street to be dumped in a mass grave. The plague was the most effective divorce lawyer in Europe. It dissolved thousands of unions a day. No paperwork, no red tape. And you know why death was the only reliable way to end the relationship? Because, basically, there was no other way. Divorce? That was a privilege for kings and dukes, requiring personal permission from the Pope and a mountain of gold. But you, Joe Schmo, if you got hitched to a shrew or a sadistic bastard, you were stuck. Your only ticket out was their death, or yours. No, we need some space, or I'm filing for divorce. Just a coffin. You just had to sit there and wait for fever or dysentery to finally take your tormentor out. So yeah, till death do us part might just be the most honest vow in history. It wasn't about romance. It was about statistics, about a brutal, stinking, and merciless reality where your marriage was almost guaranteed to end, not with gray hairs, but with a death rattle. And that's the way it was.